Good evening, I'm Ian Hannamansing. Tonight, concern from doctors, chaos in airports, and closing borders. What you need to know about the new coronavirus variant.
This variant has a large number of mutations, and some of these mutations have some worrying characteristics.
Tonight, the scope of the new threat, what we know and what we don't, as countries, including Canada, lock out travelers.
As you know, that it's very difficult to keep a virus like this out entirely.
How vaccine makers are planning to tackle it, and why this pandemic isn't over until it's over everywhere. Our experts are standing by to focus on the science. Also tonight, the Prime Minister tours the flood zone as BC prepares for another weather punch. Plus, worries about what lies beneath and getting access to clean water.
I'm not a scientist or anything like that, but right now I wouldn't want to be swimming in it.
Why a popular beauty company is quitting social media accounts.
It produces standards that are unattainable, that are unhealthy.
And the return of an iconic Canadian venue. These are good scenes.
Isn't that great?
Inside the painstaking process to restore the magic of Massey Hall. This is The National. On this Friday night, markets have shuttered. Travel restrictions are slamming into place as the World Health Organization identified a new coronavirus variant of concern today.
So today we are announcing B11529 as a variant of concern named Omicron.
Omicron has joined Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and Delta as a variant of the virus to watch closely. Scientists know it has some worrying mutations. It seems to spread quickly and has been found in multiple countries. That alone has prompted an anxious global reaction. But Christine Burak shows us there's so much we don't yet know. One thing the pandemic has taught us is that reliable science takes time. And with Omicron, this is just getting started.
There are no known cases of the new variant in Canada, but public health experts say it's just a matter of time.
We'll be looking for it. And I don't think people should be surprised if we did get a detection.
The World Health Organization has named this latest variant detected in South Africa as Omicron, warning countries it is a variant of concern.
This variant has a large number of mutations, and some of these mutations have some worrying characteristics.
In other words, Omicron could be more infectious, could cause more severe illness, and could get around immune defenses. Scientists estimate the variant has 32 tiny mutations in its spike protein. That's a problem because previous infections and vaccines have shown our immune system a version of that spike. Mutations could make it harder for antibodies to recognize this variant and stick to it in order to block it from entering our cells.
However, it's early days. We need to get the virus in people's and scientists and research labs' hands to test to see if these doom and gloom predictions actually pan out.
Already, reports say a Canadian visiting Hong Kong is infected, possibly catching the variant from a South African traveler staying in the same quarantine hotel. It's not clear if either are sick.
We understand that people are concerned. The good thing is that we have monitoring systems around the world to detect these variants very quickly.
Using virus surveillance, scientists have now identified roughly 100 cases in countries worldwide, including Botswana, Belgium, and Israel.
You're seeing the world be very, very cautious right now and proactive in saying, we've identified something. We need to get ahead of this as much as we can.
Scientists insist public health measures still work and travel bans can slow this variant down. But as long as this virus is still circulating and people remain unvaccinated, new and potentially more dangerous variants remain a real risk. Christine Burak, CBC News, Toronto.
Infectious diseases specialist Dr. Isaac Bogosh is going to stay with us through our coverage of this new variant. And Dr. Bogosh, first of all, this sounds very alarming to a lot of people. From your perspective, how big a threat are we looking at?
I think we have to approach this with a degree of healthy respect and caution. The big questions are, to what extent is it more transmissible? Does it evade the immunity that we have from vaccination, and does it chip away at that protection from immunity or the immunity we get from recovery from infection? And does it cause more significant symptoms? I think the key thing here is it would be extremely unusual for a variant to emerge that completely erases the protection we have from vaccination. It might slowly chip away at it, but it's very unlikely that it completely erodes the immune protection that we have with 2 and even 3 doses of the vaccine.
All right, lots more questions to come, so please stand by. Well, very quickly today, several countries moved to restrict travel from southern Africa. Canada, one of those countries that did that. Ashley Burke takes us through the new rules for travelers coming here.
There aren't any direct flights from South Africa, but there are ways to reach Canada. And now the government's closing those doors to keep the Omicron variant out.
We are banning the entry of foreign nationals into Canada that have traveled through Southern Africa in the last 14 days.
That ban includes 7 different African countries, stretching from Mozambique to Namibia. And officials say that list could expand.
It's very difficult to keep a virus like this out entirely. So I would not be surprised if many countries over the next days, now that they've been alerted, might go back and try and find out if the virus had already arrived.
Officials estimate up to 700 people traveled to Canada from the affected countries in the last 2 weeks. They're currently being told to self-isolate until they test negative. As for Canadians and permanent residents trying to get home, they must get a COVID test to enter Canada in the last city they transited from, and then quarantine even if they're vaccinated.
Upon entering Canada, they will be required to wait in an approved hotel until the result of their day 1 test result is known.
The announcement came amid mounting political pressure.
Canadians expect decisive action from this Liberal government. Is there a plan? What is the plan to keep Canadians safe from the African variant?
Mr. Speaker, there is a plan.
The premiers of the 2 largest provinces, Ontario and Quebec, also called for tougher border measures.
We see that there's at least a case in Belgium, so we have to be very careful.
Canadian officials said these new measures may seem like overkill, but after everything they've learned from other variants of concern, are doing this out of an abundance of caution. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Ottawa.
Starting Monday, the U.S. will ban travelers from the same 7 countries as Canada, with the addition of Malawi. Officials today also warned that list could grow if the variant continues to spread.
I've decided that we're going to be cautious, make sure there's no travel except for American citizens who are able to come back. But we don't know a lot about the variant except that it is a great concern. It seems to spread rapidly.
News of the variant sent stocks tumbling, the S&P 500 down more than 2%, and there was a familiar pandemic pattern. Airline and travel companies among the sectors getting hit the hardest, while companies for home exercise equipment and video conferencing actually jumped. The TSX took a similar drop, with energy stocks in particular seeing steep declines. As Chris Brown shows us, Europe was even quicker than Canada and the U.S. with travel bans that caused disruption and potentially nipping an industry comeback in the bud.
Just in time for Christmas, international travel red lists and COVID no-go zones are back for a second straight holiday travel season.
Now the circumstances become unpredictable again, right?
Sounds like a bit of an omen for future problems like we've seen in the previous year.
Europe's travel industry had just gotten airborne again, but with surging infections and much of the continent already either in lockdowns or contemplating them, the EU was one of the first to ban flights from southern Africa.
They should be suspended until we have a clear understanding about the danger posed by this new variant.
Hundreds of passengers arriving in Amsterdam had the ban imposed mid-flight, so they were stuck for hours when they landed, waiting for PCR tests to be cleared. At London's Heathrow, they were luckier, landing just before Britain's new restrictions kicked in.
I feel extremely relieved because, who knows how long this is going to last.
In South Africa, though, the measures were met by anger from government officials who called them premature.
The reaction of some of countries in terms of imposing travel bans and such measures are completely against the norms and standards as guided by the World Health Organization.
I think most governments...
This British travel industry rep urged people not to cancel their upcoming travel plans and just see.
I think it's inevitable that along the way you're going to get situations which will crop up where, that will go back a step, but hopefully it's only a short-term issue.
While the flight restrictions are limited to southern Africa, the fear, of course, is that they could be expanded if the variant spreads rapidly in other places. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
And let's go back to Dr. Isaac Bogosh and travel bans. Dr. Bogosh, are they effective?
I know there's such an urgent need to do something, but often travel bans, especially focused travel bans, are largely ineffective. We've heard about travel bans to Southern Africa, yet we've also heard about cases that have popped up in Hong Kong, in Belgium, in Israel, and other parts of the world. Especially, you hear about this case in Belgium. This was a woman who traveled from Egypt through Turkey back to Belgium with no contact at all to Southern Africa. So I think we have to ask ourselves, are travel bans, especially focused travel bans, really going to be that effective in preventing the spread of this infection and this variant? It's unlikely to be.
All right. Well, we're going to have a longer chat, both with you and Dr. Susie Hoda, a little later in the program on travel bans and many of the other questions that have come up today. Thanks.
My pleasure.
Concerns over the new variant come as COVID cases in this country continue to rise. Ontario saw nearly 930 new cases, the highest daily count in nearly 10 weeks. Health officials in the Kingston area have now lowered indoor gathering limits to 10 people ahead of the holiday season. Quebec also saw a rise in cases today.
We have to be careful in the next weeks. That's why we didn't announce the measure we proposed for Christmas.
Quebec's premier urging caution ahead of the holidays as health officials reported more than 1,000 new cases today for the first time since May. The federal government introduced new legislation today in an effort to protect healthcare workers from protesters.
Every day, healthcare workers are coming forward and speaking out. They are exhausted, they are discouraged, and they are fearful. And the sad reality is that these sorts of threats predate the pandemic. We've heard their calls, and today we're taking action.
Bill C-3 would make it illegal to intimidate or obstruct healthcare workers and patients seeking care. Those convicted under the proposed law could face up to 10 years in prison. The bill also brings in 10 days of paid sick leave in federally regulated sectors, a move Ottawa says could benefit nearly 600,000 workers.
Scientists are racing to assess the threat from the new coronavirus variant Omicron. Cases have now surfaced in several countries. Dutch authorities have confirmed 13 Omicron infections among airline passengers who arrived from South Africa, which sounded the alarm first. Questions still remain over how infectious Omicron might be and whether current vaccines will be effective.
Just as the world appeared to be opening up, borders are closing once again. Omicron, the new coronavirus variant, has grounded air travel and threatens to force a return to tougher pandemic restrictions.
My parents were deathly ill, so I had to come back when the borders were open to come and see them. And now, only to realize, well, it's happening all over again.
Omicron has stoked fears and sparked questions like what will happen next to freedoms and economies, and how will vaccines stand up to what the World Health Organization calls a variant of concern.
At the terminal, you'll be waiting for the tested results.
Since its discovery in southern parts of Africa last week, flights from that part of the world have been canceled or delayed. For example, in the Netherlands, 2 plane loads of passengers were detained and tested. Of those 600 travelers, 61 tested positive for the coronavirus, with 13 contracting the new variant. The infected are being kept in isolation. To all those people who come from a high-risk country and all the countries in southern Africa that have been added to the list, they are obligated to go into quarantine. At this point, the global response is to slow Omicron's spread. Switzerland is holding a referendum, asking people to support tougher restrictions. Mask mandates are back in the United Kingdom. And France has banned flights from some African countries, reopened 300 vaccination centers, and is focused on testing and tracing, all with the hope that Omicron can be contained without prolonging the nearly 2-year COVID-19 pandemic.
South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has slammed the global response to the discovery of the Omicron variant. Here's what he had to say.
We are deeply disappointed by the decision of several countries to prohibit travel from a number of southern African countries, including our own, following the identification of the Omicron variant. Now, these restrictions are completely unjustified and unfairly discriminate against our country and our southern African sister countries. The prohibition of travel is not informed by science, nor will it be effective in preventing the spread of this variant.
Let's bring in DW correspondent Adrian Krish, who is in Cape Town. Hi, Adrian. President Ramaphosa there clearly very angry at South Africa's treatment following the discovery of the Omicron variant. Can you tell us more about this?
Absolutely. He said it is against the advice of the WHO to impose these restrictions, and he was quite angry on those nations who did so and asked them to think about it again, to take those decisions back. According to him, during a recent G20 meeting in Rome, it was clearly communicated that those kind of things would not happen, that we will not see travel restrictions, and now South Africa has to suffer the consequences. In fact, the South African economy that will be suffering a lot because of these travel restrictions. The tourism season has just started here, and now most of the tourists are leaving. Nobody will be coming back. It's chaotic at the airports here at the moment, and a lot of South Africans I talked to over the weekend, they kind of share the opinion of Ramaphosa. For many people, I have the feeling here the biggest concern is not the variants, but more the economic consequences of these restrictions.
What are the authorities over there in South Africa doing to try and contain the Omicron variant?
So Ramaphosa addressed the nation tonight, and most people here thought that he would impose further restrictions, but that, to the surprise of many, did not happen. Today I was in town, and I saw several liquor stores here where people quickly went to buy more alcohol, because in the past, when Ramaphosa came up with new restrictions, we saw several liquor bans. So the sale of alcohol was banned. This did not happen. We're still staying on alert level 1, the lowest alert level since the beginning of the coronavirus crisis here. So it is a surprise. Nonetheless, we have to recall that there are restrictions still in place here. Ever since the beginning of the pandemic, South Africa has had a night curfew, for example, from midnight to 4 a.m. at the moment, and also mass gatherings are restricted. So there are restrictions in place, but life is still kind of like normal here. In the past 2 months, if you go outside, you will not have a feeling that we're in a pandemic, because the infection rates were very low in the past 2 months here. Life got back to normal, but now we're seeing worrisome signs that the numbers are going up again. So the fourth wave is starting here, and we don't know how hard it's going to hit the country. Nobody knows. Some are hoping that the summer that is currently starting will help to leave the numbers not so high. But on the other hand, South Africa can't count on its vaccination program. The vaccination rates here are very low. 25% of the population have been vaccinated so far. There's a lot of vaccine hesitancy here.
Okay. Adrian Krish in Cape Town, thank you for bringing us up to speed. Swiss voters have approved the government's pandemic response plan by a clear majority in a referendum. Now, only people who have been fully vaccinated or have recovered or tested negative will be able to access bars, restaurants and public events. The law also provides billions of Swiss francs in aid for workers and businesses hit by the pandemic. Switzerland is the first European country to put its pandemic measures to a public vote. Final results show 62% of voters supported the legislation. Earlier, we spoke to journalist Andreas Zumasch in Bern and asked him if this referendum result was expected.
No, not at all. The government and the majority in parliament who had introduced the law you just referred to were very concerned they might lose, because for the last 6 months since this law was introduced in early June, you had a very loud and partially very violent opposition against specifically the regulation that everybody now has to have a COVID certificate showing either to be fully vaccinated or recovered or negatively tested. And the very fact that the biggest party in parliament, the right-wing populist Swiss People's Party, also was in the opposition, created a lot of concern that this might be lost. But you just mentioned already the result. 62% is a very solid yes to the law. And the very fact that 65.9% of the Swiss voters participate, this is one of the highest margins ever in the last 150 years since the referendum possibility do exist.
France's Minister for Overseas Territories is on his way to Martinique and Guadeloupe following days of violent protests on the Caribbean islands. The French government has promised a firm response to the unrest. Local opposition to COVID-19 measures imposed by Paris is adding to historic grievances over representation and living standards.
The smoldering aftermath of a gas station set on fire by protesters in Martinique. An attack that could have been deadly.
There are people around here who don't want to be killed. I don't know what these kids are thinking. Setting a gas station on fire like a bomb, that's going too far.
Martinique and Guadeloupe have been gripped for days by heated clashes between protesters and police. The protests are being fueled by opposition to France's coronavirus policies, including mandatory vaccination for healthcare workers.